Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, education, elections, definitely elections. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined as always by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. Fall is in the air.
I'll say.
My favorite time of year, and all is good.
It is even a little bit chilly these mornings.
That's fine.
Nice.
That's fine by me. I like a chilly morning, moderate afternoon. That's
especially after this past summer where it was like no matter what time you got up, by the time you got out the front door, you were like already in an oven.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a nice break. And I should note for those of you listening at home that Scott is sitting here in full Alabama gear. He's got the t-shirt, he's got the hat. Of course, by the time this podcast comes out on Sunday, we will all know the result.
And Scott will be very sad. Come on, let's. I'll play the homer here.
That's right. You can play the homer. Scott. I'm making no predictions about either the football game or the elections.
Well, given the way that the season has gone for both teams, neither one of us should do any trash talking before the game.
Right after the game, that's when there can be trash talking.
You can always do that, but neither the last 2 weeks for. Both teams have been pretty hard to watch.
I actually was I had my phone out. I was getting ready to text you after the Vandy game for you guys, and I got sidetracked and was doing something else, and then that whole thing happened at the Tennessee game, and I was like, man,
the shortest lived Schadenfreude of all time.
I was so glad I didn't finish that text and get it sent out.
Do you know how many of my friends have told me that now? I might become an Arkansas fan because they saved me a lot of grief that weekend. But
all right, well, this is not a sports podcast. It just tends to bleed in sometimes the way it inevitably does here in East Tennessee during football season. But we do have non-sports things to talk about, especially about the upcoming election, of course. Early voting started this past week on Wednesday the 16th. We'll talk about that a little bit. We wrote about one of the races on the ballot, the State Senate District 6 race. Talk about that. A lot of talk going on about another item on the ballot, which is the City of Knoxville's Amendment number 2 at the bottom of your ballot, but at the top of social media discussion, at least in the sort of wonky civic affairs realms that we tend to inhabit. Lots of people talking about this. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and then we have an interview segment coming up where we will be talking to both a proponent of that amendment, Reverend Sam Brown, and an opponent of it, State Representative Sam McKenzie. They were both good enough to join us. It's a good conversation, so stick around for that. But to start off, we will talk about something not related to the elections, and this is something that actually correspondent Angela Dennis wrote about for us this past week, and that is an interesting lawsuit filed against the Knox County Sheriff's Office. So people probably remember back in the spring, there were fairly active pro-Palestinian protests throughout Knoxville, downtown, and especially on the University of Tennessee campus. Some of those protests on the UT campus led to arrests of people. Everybody was being peaceful at these. That should be noted. Nobody was arrested for any kind of, destruction of property or anything like that. People were arrested simply for not vacating certain areas when the university instructed them to. Among the people who was arrested was a woman named Layla Solis. She and her husband, both Palestinian Americans, were protesting, and of course, what these protests are about is the ongoing Israeli offensive in Gaza and the huge death toll that it has produced, which continues. And they were arrested. They were taken out to the Knox County Detention Center in East Knox County, and they were booked. And they were photographed. And this is the normal booking process that happens when you get arrested. They fingerprint you, they take your mugshot, and then they put those mugshots. This is something the Knox County Sheriff's Office does. You can go to the Sheriff's Office website and click through and see recent arrests, and it'll have the name and the photo of the person who was arrested and what they were charged with. And so Solis has filed a lawsuit because she was wearing a hijab, which is the head covering that observant Muslim women wear. It's a form of religious observation, a religious practice. And she was taken to the facility. She was booked and she was photographed. And they compelled her to remove the hijab for the photograph. And she objected to this, saying that was a violation of her religious rights, and they compelled her to anyway because they said they needed it for their own records. She says in the lawsuit that they promised her that photograph would not be posted publicly, where people could see her with her head uncovered. But then they proceeded to do that too. Mm-hmm. And nobody disputes that all of that happened. That photo was posted publicly. It is still in the sheriff's archives. It's a public record, so anybody who wants a copy of it could theoretically request one and get it. And so what this lawsuit alleges is that the sheriff's office, first of all, violated its own policies, because as it turns out, the Knox County Sheriff's Office does have a policy around this exact topic, which is respect of people's religious rights, and it commits the office to respecting those rights and not violating them. And then there are also federal laws that come into play here that, again, protect religious rights. And so she has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit alleging that her civil rights were violated. And Scott, I think one of the things that is most significant about this, to me, just reading the lawsuit, there's the facts of the case, and you can find this lawsuit. We have it linked on our website. But there's also who is representing her. And because, this is something that sort of people who watch court cases do is when a case is filed, you want to see what are the allegations, but you also want to see who's involved on the legal side. Her lawyer is Daniel Horowitz. And people in Knoxville may not be that familiar with him because he's more well-known in Nashville. But he is one of Tennessee's leading civil rights attorneys. So a lot of the other court cases that you might hear us talk about or you might read about coming out of Nashville, for example, the challenge to the abortion trafficking law that was passed this year, that was just granted a partial injunction because of a lawsuit against it, that was filed by Daniel Horowitz on behalf of the plaintiffs in that case. He has multiple lawsuits, and he has won multiple lawsuits against CoreCivic, which is the leading private prison operator, which of course operates one of the state's largest prisons. Daniel Horowitz is a serious guy, and I think that's the kind of name on a lawsuit that gets the attention of, for example, the Knox County Law Department.
Yeah, they definitely know who he is, and I'm sure that that's going to played in the calculations about whether they decide to settle or not. And,
right. Yeah. And we will see, right. Does this case actually go to trial, or do they review the facts of it and say, okay, we might be better off dealing with this at the front end?
Well, I mean, in one thing about this case, this is one thing that I think bears repeating over and over again about the importance of the hijab.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wearing an Alabama hat. That's a head covering,
right?
But the hijab is almost sacred.
Yeah.
It's worn. Only members of the family are allowed to see. A woman wearing a hijab without it.
Right.
It is a very much an integral part of being a Muslim. It's not just a it's not a scarf. It is truly a way of worshiping almost.
Right. You are. I mean, when somebody is wearing the hijab, they are practicing their faith.
Yes.
That's what that is. Right. It's not just a garment. It's sort of, it's an ongoing religious practice essentially when you're in public.
And I mean, if the point of the mugshot is to know what the person looks like when you see them in public, this person is always going to have it on. So it's actually a more accurate photo of the individual for the public's use of it, because it could be a pretty significant difference when you see somebody's hair and not. And
sure.
It would be a more recognizable image of this person with the hijab as opposed to without.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And certainly the lawsuit argues that the removal was not necessary for identification. You can clearly see her face, and that, that's plenty of identification. And, this is in line with some other things the sheriff's office has been accused of over the years, having to do with respect for minority rights of various kinds. There have been allegations of mistreatments of Spanish-speaking people who are being arrested or where they respond and they fail to provide translation services in circumstances where they should. I think that and it's interesting that this arrest, the sheriff's office was involved in this at the request of the University of Tennessee. The Knoxville Police Department, which has jurisdiction over the city, although, of course, on campus, the University of Tennessee Police Department actually has authority, but KPD was not involved in this. The sheriff's office got called in, and I do think that, Knox County is an increasingly diverse place overall, but a lot of that diversity is concentrated within city limits, as we know. Not that there aren't, diverse populations outside the city, but percentage-wise, a greater concentration is inside the city. The sheriff's office, of course, at the detention center, they deal with everybody. They deal with, whether somebody's brought in by KPD or whoever. But the sheriff's office in their patrol and in their regular law enforcement has less experience on a day-to-day basis dealing with that kind of diversity than KPD does. Not saying that KPD does, an always stellar job either. But I do think this is, among the things that you could maybe tease out of this is that you have a sheriff's office that is overwhelmingly white, and that on at least the law enforcement patrol side, mostly deals with a less diverse population than exists within the city. And we have seen these conflicts from time to time with them.
Yeah, that's one thing. The sheriff's office is overwhelmingly white. So is Knoxville Police Department.
Yeah.
But the Knoxville Police Department does deal with minority populations of various types, religious minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, all the time. And
they do a lot of, KPD does a lot of specific training around that. Now, again, not saying that always leads to, sensitive law enforcement, but they do more training on all of that than the sheriff's office does.
Yeah. And, but then again, you kind of get back to the point is, well, the sheriff's office doesn't do that much training because they rarely deal with the situation. But, as this shows, they do deal with it, and it's, and you don't want to, just assume that, that she would win her case. But, in a dispute like this that could end up being very costly to the sheriff's office. That training's, seems like it would be a bargain.
Yeah, and there were some interesting exhibits attached with the lawsuit because they filed, records requests related to it. And those included some emails between members of the sheriff's office having a discussion about whether or not it was okay that they made her take off the hijab and that they posted the photo. Like, there's internal discussions with some people at the sheriff's office clearly showing that maybe maybe he shouldn't have done this. So all of that, I mean, it looks like it looks like a strong case. I guess as always, we'll see what comes out.
Yeah. One of the things that I was talking to somebody about the case, and they said, "Well, it's a slam dunk." I said, "Well, we don't know," and I'm always real hesitant in a court case to say, "Oh, this one's going." First of all, I'm not even a lawyer, much less a judge or know the evidence and everything. But the one thing about like the sheriff's office policy says that they're not supposed to post a photo of that and do all that unless they pose a safety risk.
Right.
Now, no one has alleged that, obviously, and
this is somebody who was again arrested for peaceful political expression,
and I doubt I would imagine that a judge would laugh the law department out of the courtroom if they suggested that she was a security risk, but they could make that argument, and strange things happen in courts, as we all know. And so but it does look like a really strong case.
It's a strong case with a strong lawyer, and certainly on paper a sympathetic plaintiff. So we'll see what happens with it. But you can find that on our website. Okay, let's talk about the election. Early voting did start on Wednesday, October 16th. It continues through October 31st. Halloween, and you can find information on all of the times and places that you can early vote at knoxvotes.org, which is the website of the Knox County Election Commission. So, Scott, first of all, how's the voting going so far? We don't have a lot of data yet.
No, we don't. As of the time we're recording this, we only have one day. Had Wednesday, the first day of early voting. Polls were open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and it is a really good turnout, and way higher than in 2020, the last time the presidential race was on the ballot. 13,039 people cast their ballots in person at the 11 early voting locations that are open right now. There were lines at some of them. I think we got reports that in Farragut, I think that which had the most number of people voting was at the Farragut location. That the wait was an hour or so, and now other places wasn't. Chris Davis, the election administrator, when I asked him about wait times, and he said, well, he voted at Gibbs, and he just walked in, and less than 5 minutes later, he was out the door. He was.
Yeah, I voted at the City County building on Wednesday, took down my parents and my son, so we had 3 generations all voting together, and at the City County building, which is not typically one of the busiest places, we were able to basically just walk in. Yeah. And I mean, there were other people there, but the entire thing for all 4 of us took like 10 minutes.
Yeah, the City County building is one of those. It's basically if you live or work downtown, that's where you vote, and if you're not going downtown, if you're just out, and you don't even have to live out very far. I mean, you don't drive to the City County building and pay to park in the middle of the day just to vote. So, right. There are so basically, if you go to some of the heavier turnout places, downtown West, Farragut, New Harvest Park in North Knoxville. Those you might have lines if you go there. But that one of the things is, I mentioned that it's higher than turnout. It's higher than it was in 2020. 2020, like I said, 13,000 basically voted. In 2020, 8,111 voted on the first day. Now, big difference. The polling places were open 12 hours this year and only 8 hours 4 years ago. So even though the increase is like 60% or something like that over 2020, but when you factor in the time and you do it on a voter per hour basis, which is kind of a silly thing to do, but then I'm a silly guy sometimes. It's still up. It's up about 7%. So, which is good. 4 years ago, people were voting on the first day of early voting at a clip of 1,014 votes an hour, and it's 1,087 now this year. So you can't make a lot of conclusions from one day, but generally speaking, the first day of early voting is a pretty heavy one, and not nearly as heavy as the last few days are. So, but that's an encouraging start for voting and for turnout. And as we know, Tennessee is a low turnout state, the lowest turnout state.
The lowest turnout state.
So
we're number worst.
Yes, and so any improvement is welcome.
And it obviously shows a fair amount of engagement and interest in this election, which, of course, we assume all of this is being driven by the presidential race. This is probably not because people are coming out to vote for local races. It's not that City of Knoxville referendum that we're going to be talking about that's driving all these voters. But it also echoes what we're seeing in other places. Georgia also started early voting this week, and statewide, their first day of early voting, they had 328,000 ballots in Georgia,
wow.
Which is a lot. It's a record, and it broke the previous first day record, which was set in 2020. That was 136,000. So they more than doubled. And again, that was a record in 2020.
Yeah.
This year was another record that more than doubled the previous record. So people are getting out there. Who knows what that means? People can interpret that any number of ways, depending on how they want things to be going. But at a minimum, it looks like there's a lot of interest and a lot of energy. And if you believe that, democracy functions better when more people are involved in it, then things look relatively good so far. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a couple of things that are on the ballot, Scott. You wrote this week about that state Senate District 6 race, which has incumbent State Senator Becky Duncan Massey, who's a Republican, against Democrat DeMonica Bryan. What's going on there?
Well, Massey has been she's served 3.5 terms so far in the Senate. She's an incumbent. She's a Duncan, and a Republican. So Knox County tends to vote Republican, and so she's running. But DeMonica Bryan is a very engaging candidate. I met her, talked with her, and she North Carolina native, has lived here 16 years, has worked for the Department of Children's Services for that entire time, and a variety of positions. One of them was, interestingly, as an investigator into some of the worst abuse cases, and she refers back to that a lot when she talks. And she is pro-choice, and and talked about how the importance of that, especially for victims of rape and incest. that definitely need to have she thinks you definitely need to have exemptions for them. And she talks about when she was an investigator, a 12-year-old girl who had been molested by her uncle and gotten pregnant, that she had to counsel. When she talked about she's very strong on LGBTQ issues, and talked about a transgender girl that she was counseling, who told her how scared she was to live in Tennessee. And on the day that they talked to the next day, the girl committed suicide. Just things like that are she brings all this to the table when as she's running, and Massey is, of course, running on her record, and she's an effective legislator. One of the things she likes to talk about is last session she 30 of the 31 bills she sponsored passed unanimously, so she can get things done. She's on a couple of key committees, the Transportation Committee and the Health and Welfare Committee.
Yeah, she chairs the Transportation Committee,
and
which is that's a pretty substantial role.
Yes, it is. The state spends a lot of money on highways, so and one of the two of the things that she's wanting to emphasize moving forward are the I-40 75 makeover in West Knoxville. That's they're planning that whole. It's going to be a completely different road in 15 years when they get finished with this or whatever. And talk about shepherding it through, and it's going to supposedly have smart lanes and all that good stuff.
And choice lanes,
aka choice lanes,
also known as toll lanes.
So yeah.
Governor Lee doesn't like it when people call them toll lanes, but him not liking it doesn't change what they are.
That's true. And then the other thing is the effort to influence the state to build a mental health hospital in or around Knoxville. And as a member of the Health and Welfare Committee, she's pretty well positioned to do that. The one thing that's pretty interesting, and this is one thing that Brian brought up, is that Massey has changed her position on school vouchers, and actually, it's one of the things that Brian said that one of the types of things that she said that she wanted to run against Massey, because Massey can change her position, and Brian basically said that she changed her position because she had a primary challenge from the right, and Massey said that a couple of things. One is that that she thinks that the state legislature has funded the public school system adequately in the last couple of years. They have the money to be able to do this. She also pointed out that you can use this to go from one public school system to another public school system. Because if you do that, say you live in West Knoxville, but you want your kids to go to Oak Ridge High School, and you can do that, but you have to pay tuition at Oak Ridge to be able to get in, and this would allow you to do that. Nobody's talking about you. She's the only person I know of who's actually talked about that. But Brian, of course, is, as a Democrat, is very much against vouchers. She, said, they don't work in any of the state. You look at any state where they're being used, and they don't work, and it just takes money away from the public school system. So that's a big bone of contention. But it's like it's a down ballot race, and it depends on how people vote from the top down in a presidential race. And
that district has voted fairly Republican over the years. It's partly drawn up to to do that because, of course, the Republican majority in the legislature drew the legislative districts.
It goes from the Gibbs area up in northeast Knox County, east Knox County, which is all is all very rural. Then down into South Knox County, including South Knoxville, which makes it, there's some urban neighborhoods there. Then jumps across the river to West Knoxville and the urban neighborhoods out to the Concord area. So it's it's got a little bit of everything in it. It's urban, suburban, and rural areas. But you're right. It is drawn to do that, just like the other Senate district that is completely inside the city limits or the county borders is drawn the same way.
Yeah, I mean, basically, and then we have 3 state Senate districts that partly come in. I mean, there's the 2, like you say, 6 and 7
inside,
and then there's Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally's District 5 that dips down into Knox County from Anderson County, and those 3 state Senate districts quite neatly carve up the urban center of Knox County, which is the highest concentration of Democratic votes, of course. So, it would certainly be possible if somebody wanted to draw up a Senate district within Knox County that was, that gave a strong shot to Democrats. But what they've done instead is they've sliced up very deliberately, sort of like the most concentrated Democratic areas across these 3 districts. So an uphill battle for Brian, obviously, and that's true for many Democrats running in Knox County and in East Tennessee. I will say that I moderated another forum for the League of Women Voters in this race just this past week on Tuesday, and we have talked about in some previous forums the issue with candidates, especially Republicans, not showing up to these forums. I will say that both candidates were there, both Massey and Brian were there, and that Massey I think deserves credit as a Republican incumbent. She has a very good record for showing up. She shows up at candidate forums. Yes. She shows up at legislative forums. She is generally quite accessible and responsive. She's responsive to us when we call her or text her. And so, of course, that's what we like to see from all of our elected officials of whatever party they are. But since we have talked in recent weeks about the weaknesses of some Republican incumbents on those counts, I think it's important to note that Massey does actually show up to these things. And it was a good forum. We had a packed room. I mean, actual standing room only in the Public Works Service Center. Had about 70 people. And if you want to, it was a good discussion, went on for an hour. They covered all the questions came from the audience. They covered all the major topics you would expect at the state level, from abortion to guns to transportation issues to climate change, like you name it. And you can find a video of that on the Facebook page of the League of Women Voters of Knoxville, Knox County. And of course, you can find Scott's coverage of this race on our website. And worth mentioning that now that we are into voting time, we have moved all of our election-related coverage outside our paywall, so you can find all of that. Even if you're not a subscriber, you can read all of it. If you are a subscriber, you can share it. Send it to your friends and relatives and whoever else you think might be interested. All of that is there. Another issue, of course, that is on the ballot is the City of Knoxville. Well, the City of Knoxville has 2 amendments on the ballot. And Scott, we haven't really talked at all about Amendment 1. So let's do that real quick because it's the simpler and less controversial of these 2. And then we'll go on to the discussion of number 2. But tell us about Amendment number 1.
Okay, Amendment number 1 would just change the election cycle for the 5th District City Council seat. That's it. And the reason that they have talked about doing this is that there's 6 council districts. 5 of them are elected in one election cycle. And then 2 years later, because these are staggered, the 5th District seat is on the ballot, along with the at-large council seats, mayor, and municipal judge. Well, This, if you vote yes on question 1, it would move the 5th district election to join the other district election. So then we would have, on those years, you would have 6 district races on the ballot, and then in the other years you would have no district seats on the ballot.
The mayor, the judge, and the
Right.
3 at-large seats.
And a couple things worth noting: this would take effect in 2027. The current 5th district representative who's pushed for this is Charles Thomas. He is term limited. This will not affect him. It won't do any favors for him. So just get that out. But in 2027, that election would the term of office for that person elected then will only be 2 years, and that will put it on the other cycle. And there's a couple of reasons for doing that. Especially, it depends on what happens with Amendment 2. But if Amendment 2 passes and Amendment 1 doesn't, then the people who live in the 5th district would only be able to vote once every 4 years. They wouldn't even vote.
Well, no, if Amendment 2 passes, they get to vote. Everybody gets to vote. If Amendment 2
fails, excuse me, you're right. If Amendment 2 fails, and
this is complicated.
It is complicated, but basically the Amendment 1 is very easy. If the only people with a real dog in the fight are the people who live in the 5th district.
Like me, I live in the 5th district. Well, and I think the way this was set up originally, it was because there are 9 council members, and so typically when you have a body like that, you want to structure your elections so that you more or less do half and half. You do staggered terms so that all 9 don't all come up at the same time, and so they had 5 district races running in one cycle, and then 2 years later, four council races, which are the 3 at-large seats, and then 1 district seat. And the 5th district just happens to be the one that got stuck in that cycle. And
the reason was a good old-fashioned political compromise that it was the 5th district, because back in 1968, when the referendum passed to have the people need to stop saying current system because it's gone too. The old system. When it went into effect, one of the council member, because before that they were all at large seats. The council member who was going to be the 5th district representative had only been in office had just been elected to office, and so they would have only served a 2-year term if they had been on the ballot in 1969. So what they did is they let that person stay on until 1971 and put it on a different cycle, so they could serve a full term. So there was a lot of it is the 5 and 4, making it even, but there was also a little political.
The reason it was the 5th district specifically,
right?
Was that,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. That.
But so the bottom line with number 1 is, if it passes, the 5th district will end up being on the same ballot cycle with the other 5 district seats.
Right.
That's what it'll do. That's number 1. Okay, number 2, and we have talked about amendment number 2 a lot because you wrote a long piece on it a week or 2 ago, and we talked about it then, and you can find that again on our website. But it is a lot more, it's more confusing than amendment number 1, and it is definitely more controversial than amendment number 1. So first of all, can you just, and if people want the fuller discussion of it, you can either go back to our prior podcast episode or go read Scott's story. But Scott, just remind us what this does. Like, if this passes, what does it do?
Okay. Well, if it passes, we will establish a a completely at-large voting system for all city council members, including those who represent what are currently known as districts. And what that means is, while there would be residency requirements in those for 6 seats in those districts for candidates, everybody in the city would vote in the primary to select the 2 top finishers to go on to the general election. Everybody in the city would, and then in the general election, the top 2 finishers would face each other, and everybody in the city would vote for those in every seat. So it's very in a way it's similar to the way we do it now, or we have done it till now, and that is we'd have a district only district voters only selecting the candidates in the primary, and then citywide vote in the general election.
Right. That's the past system.
The past system.
That is not what this would change it to.
Yes, that is out the door. State Representative
Elaine Davis.
I couldn't pull up Elaine. I had Davis in my head, but Elaine Davis pushed through a bill that doesn't allow that anymore. And this is the city's response to that, is putting this on the ballot to.
It's kind of the closest thing to maintain, to keeping something more or less like the old system, because in the old system, everybody voted in the general election, and so this would still have that, but now everybody would be voting in the primaries too.
Right, and if you vote no, and if the no votes win, it is rejected. Then it kind of reverts back to what was basically the original intent of the law, in that you would have the districts, and the district voters only would vote in the primaries, just like it's been for the last 50 years. And the top 2 finishers would go on to the general election. However, in the general election, instead of being a citywide vote, it would be a district only vote again.
Right.
So only the district voters would be able to vote for district candidates in both the primary and general election.
Which, as I like to remind people, like the way this gets talked about in the city is that this would be a drastic change, and it would be a change to the way the city has done things. But what it would be changing to is the same way we elect everything else, like county commission, school board, state legislature, Congress. All of those have districts where only the people who live in the districts vote for their district representative in both the primary and the general. That's basically how everything runs, and is also the way almost every other city in Tennessee elects their local government. Nashville has a metro council of 40 members. 40 members. They are elected by district. Only the people who live in the district can vote on them. This is the way like Knoxville's old system was an exception. Whether it was a good exception or a bad exception or whatever, it was not a normal way that most people do district representation. And so if this referendum fails, what Knoxville will have is basically the way we do everything else, which is that district representatives get elected by people who live in the district.
Right. I've been working on like a metaphor or some sort of analogy to try to simplify this. The best I can is yes would mean if you're in the city, you vote for everybody all the time in every election. And then no would be you vote like any other normal election. Like normal is a terrible word to use on it, but that's the best.
And there would still be, like if it fails, those 6 district representatives would be elected from within their district. But the city does also have 3 existing at-large members, and everybody gets to vote for those, and nothing about this would change that. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that people who are in favor of passage of Amendment 2 like to say that, right now or up until now, you've been able to vote for all 9 city council members. All 9 city council members are accountable to you as your representatives. under the new, if this passes, you would only be able to vote for 4. I'm sorry, if this passes, you would still be able to vote for all 9. If it fails, you'd only be able to vote for 4. And
right, your own district rep and the 3
at large. So there wouldn't be a complete loss of at large representation. Either way, I mean, like I said, this doesn't affect at large either way. So
right, and so there's been a lot of back and forth over this, including among people who are often on the same side of issues, but have come down different places on this. So this past week, we've seen a lot of sort of competing endorsements or people urging people to vote one way or the other, right?
Yeah, first we kind of had the people who want you to vote no came out, and as somewhat of a surprise, current at-large council member Lynn Fugit is signed on to a letter urging people to reject this, and
even though she was among those who voted to put it on the ballot,
she was among those who put it on the ballot. She said, I thought the people of Knoxville need to vote on it, but she doesn't. She thinks that maintaining that district, a stronger district representation would be better. A couple other former at-large council members are for it. Janet Testerman and George Wallace. State Representative Sam McKenzie.
Against it, you mean? They're all against.
I'm sorry, against it.
Yeah.
Sam McKenzie's against it. We'll hear from him later. And then the next day, the pro amendment folks sent out a similar press release with the people that support it, that have endorsed it. All 7 of the remaining. While she didn't sign the no letter, Amelia Parker is a council member who's also against it. So Amelia Parker and Lynn Fugit, who often disagree with one another on council, agree on this one that it should be rejected. The other 7 council members all endorsed passage, along with 6 other former council members. So you kind of have a lot of the prominent people, the civic leaders, disagree on this. So
and I think it's interesting that, like, you talk about Fugit and Parker, they are almost the ideological poles of the current council, because Fugit is a centrist, essentially. She has certainly been a Republican at prior times in her life. It's a little unclear whether she still identifies as one. Nevertheless, she's kind of like the most Republican, I guess you could say, member of the current council. And Parker, I think everybody would agree, is kind of the most left populist member of the current council. The fact that you had George Wallace, who's a Republican, Janet Testerman, who's a Republican, also opposing this. You have opposition coming from both the left and the right. And I think what that is about is that in both cases, their concerns are for minority voices being represented. And they are concerned about different minorities. Within the city of Knoxville, at least the current electorate, Republicans are an electoral minority. That's just the way it is. And we will probably see that again in this election. The majority of city voters are most likely going to vote for Kamala Harris, just as the majority of voters countywide, well, we'll see. But certainly they have voted Republican in the past. So within the city, Republicans are actually like an electoral minority group. They are not the ones that Parker is concerned about. Parker is concerned about racial and economic minorities who she thinks tend to get left out and underrepresented. But what they share is they are both concerned that a system where everybody is elected at large is just going to default to essentially is going to overrepresent the majority. And within the city right now, the majority is basically
white progressives,
white people who vote for Democrats, right? And that's why a lot of the people who are supporting it, Mayor Kincannon, most of the current members of City Council, that's who they are.
Yeah,
they are white progressives, and so it has created this very interesting, and I know some people who are trying to figure out how to vote on it by like looking at, well, who do I either like or don't like, and what are they saying? And that actually gives you a very confusing set of responses because, like, let's say you're a progressive city voter and you see that, oh, Sam McKenzie and Amelia Parker are against this, but Mayor Kincannon and
Reverend Harold Middlebrook.
And the Reverend Harold Middlebrook, very prominent black civil rights leader in Knoxville, they are for it. That's going to leave a lot of people scratching their heads.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is one of the few issues or elections where, generally speaking, you can look at who's for it and who's against it and know how you're going to vote. If you're, it's just, you can just take those cues. That way you don't have to research the issue as much, and you can just say, oh, well, if my guy's for it, then I'll be for it, whatever. That's not the case here because, there are people that individual Knoxvillians respect on both sides of this issue. And so it'll be a real big, it is more incumbent on them to research it and figure it out. It should be. Of course, this being a presidential election year, which brings out a lot of people who aren't engaged in city government, the level of information that a lot of people are bringing to that bit on the ballot at the very end of the ballot. Who knows?
And it's on the back of the ballot. I want to say that for anybody who hasn't voted yet, if you're a city voter, you are going to have to, you get your state and federal elections on the front of the ballot. You have to turn it over to see these two city amendments. They are there. So
it just got to cross my mind, like how many people are going to vote on these city amendments that haven't voted in a city election in
it could be
numerous cycles.
Yeah.
It could be a large number.
Yeah. More people vote for a ballot amendment in the city than have voted in the last total city races multiple times.
That's one of the things we're going to be looking at when the votes come in. But yeah, and then you have the people who are concerned about, especially about African American representation in the 6th district, and word that under the previous system you had the top two finishers in the primary that only the district voters voted for did go on to the general election. Now, they were voted on citywide, but you knew that the top two were the top two choices of the district.
Right. And
the top choice of the district has won in every race since 1999.
Right.
Well, since 2001, 1999. The second place finisher won citywide. Anyway.
And changing to an all at-large system essentially gives the district, or as it would be called in the new system, the region, it doesn't give those voters any more say over their regional representation than anybody else in the city.
Right. And there are some practical implications there. You've got your kind of old-fashioned neighborhood advocate who is very well respected in their district, but not really known outside the district. Who would possibly finish first in the district only primary, might finish third or fourth citywide because nobody knows them citywide.
Yeah,
very easily could happen and has happened in the past in a way, but this would be in the primary, not the general election. So. There is the concern that qualified and popular within the 6th district African American candidates might not win the primary citywide. Especially, if you have and we probably will the next election have 6 or more candidates.
Yeah, in the 6th district in particular, we've had elections where there were like 15 people on the
Yeah,
primary
when
ballot.
in 2019, was it 2019, 2017? I can't do math on the fly, but Gwen McKenzie ran for the first time.
Yeah, that was
there were
in
like
17.
12,
yeah.
17. Yeah, I think they had 12 people on the ballot for the primary, and McKenzie won. And that's one of these things that this is one of those things that kind of shows both sides of it, because McKenzie won that. Or in the primary, she finished first, and
Jennifer
Montgomery,
yep, local realtor. Yep.
She finished second, and Jennifer Montgomery, and so they go on to the general election, and Gwen McKenzie, very well known African American businesswoman who's very active, and then Montgomery is white, and very well funded, known very well citywide.
She had backing of the realtors.
Yeah, so and so you're sitting there going, okay, McKenzie ended up winning.
Yeah,
which the supporters of the change will point to and say, see, Knoxville, the Knoxville citywide voters will vote for black candidates over white candidates, and they'll also point to Amelia Parker's victories in her 2 races where she defeated well-funded white candidates, and so you've got the one side saying, you might not get black candidates to go on, but maybe you will. I mean, we won't know till we know. I mean, that's the thing, and you can't just make assumptions, because the citywide voters have shown a willingness to vote for black candidates as opposed to
racial minorities, and certainly for women, and for
and so it's a very different world than it was in the 1960s when the old system was adopted. So.
Yep. Well, to help shed some more light on this, and really to let all of you hear directly from people who are both for and against this, we did invite 2 prominent, well-known, respected voices in the community to talk about it. We have the Reverend Sam Brown, who is the head of the Knoxville branch of the NAACP, although you will hear him make the point that he is speaking on his own behalf here, not necessarily on behalf of the chapter itself. I don't know that they've taken a position, but he's speaking for himself. And State Representative Sam McKenzie, who is opposed to making this change, and it was a good conversation.
It was, they basically covered all of that, and they covered some of the intricacies of this. Reverend Brown is supportive of the change. It's going to be, like we said, it's going to create an all-at-large voting system. And granted, he's not speaking on behalf of the NAACP, but the NAACP, generally speaking, does not like at-large voting systems. Then you've got Sam McKenzie, who voted against the bill that threw out the old system. So he did not vote to eliminate the old system, but now he is urging that people vote no on the new system that they're going to be putting in. So, and he explains that. They both explain kind of those things and why they're for it, why they're against it. It's a great conversation.
All right, let's roll the tape.
Here to talk about the City of Knoxville's referendum number 2 that is on the ballot are State Representative Sam McKenzie and the Reverend Sam Brown, who is also the president of the NAACP of Knoxville, Knox County. Welcome to both of you. Thank you, Representative McKenzie, for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, and thank you, Reverend Brown. One of the things that I want to start with is first of all, we'll start with Reverend Brown. You are in support of passage of referendum number 2. Give us the reason why. Why should people vote for it?
Thank you, Scott, and I want to thank the Compass for this opportunity to share our thoughts on this, and also what an honor it is to be here with my state representative, Representative McKenzie, who I did vote for today. And so it's such an honor to be able to just engage in dialogue. I would like to just say as a disclaimer, Sam Brown is voting yes for the amendment, and not necessarily the branch endorsing the amendment itself. So I wanted to start off with that. But I am in favor of the amendment because just through my personal experience as a citizen, it has yielded the people who I serve as a pastor in this community and as a citizen myself, it has yielded greater results from our city legislature and our city government with having the entire body accountable to our residents here in the community that I serve and represent. I can give you contrasting examples of how my community has been underserved by county commission, by the school board, because we only have one person who really cares of our experience, who is really accountable to us. But there is a difference in our experience when engaging with city government and with city council. Also, when we think about the past, I would say at least 3 election cycles in our city elections, we have seen that the system that we have elected people under for the past 50 years has yielded us the greatest diversity we've seen on city council in the entire history of our city. And so while I do appreciate the history of why at-large systems did pop up in different municipalities, particularly all over the South, to undermine Voting Rights Act of 1965. We just have not seen that play out here in Knoxville in recent history. And so that's why I'm supporting it, because I just want to be able to have a choice and to have a voice that is heard with all 9 members of city council versus just 4.
All right, Representative McKenzie, you have come out in opposition to Amendment 2. Talk about why you think that it will be better if it doesn't pass.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you all for putting on this forum. And I hope people are just listening to all the issues and making an informed decision. So thank you all for that. And thank you, Reverend Brown, for voting for me today. I truly appreciate that. This came as a result of a horrible piece of legislation that Elaine Davis put forward, as you know, so bad that Senator Briggs pulled his name off of it, and you end up having to have it passed by somebody outside the city in the House and somebody outside the county in the Senate. So it's a bad piece of legislation. However, the biggest caveat is this fix is worse than the poison pill that Representative Davis put forward. This fix will effectively centralize the power to the privileged few. And those privileged few reside in the richer parts of North Knoxville and in West Knoxville. If you look at the past 5 elections, they've decided it. Now, every district is equally represented, but not in voting power, not in voting strength. So we're trying to get the vote out. That's what we're doing now. But the reality of it is they're going to be the ones deciding the votes. And people talk about having influence in other districts. That's a positive and a negative thing. If there's a homeless shelter that's going to go out in East Knoxville, there may be some positive influences to put it there. If it's going out in West Knoxville or the richer parts of North Knoxville, then there will be opposition to that will be strong. That's one piece, but also the whole black voting strength. And I know the 6th district is our most diverse district. It's 40-something% African American, which they say didn't engage the Voting Rights Act, but it's still. East Knoxville is where African Americans have and will always be centralized. So whether that number is 40, 44, or 54, that's where we have our best chance at keeping an African American in the seat and being a diverse city. Imagine Knoxville that's monoracially represented at city council. You can take this data point, what's happened in the last 4 years, and say, well, we're very, very diverse. But you can also say that's one data point in 200 years worth of voting in this great city of ours. So don't take this one data point where we are now to have future indication that we're going to remain diverse.
All right. We'll go back to you, Representative McKenzie, because you just touched on a question I was going to ask you, because you did vote against the law that is making this necessary and making a change necessary. But then you're voting against this, and it's because I believe you said the solution that has been put forward is worse than the one that the default system that the bill calls for.
Right. So basically the bill outlawed the way the city of Knoxville was casting our election, but to have an at-large, so the default is to go back to a district only election cycle. Okay. And that is the default. Let me be clear. When the voting rights passed, this was Knoxville's attempt at suppressing the African American vote or having their thumb on the foot of who's elected in the 6th district. That's back in the 60s. I get that. I get the fact that Elaine Davis had nefarious reasons for this. But again, this answer for an at-large solution is not a good answer. The NAACP across this great nation has fought against this type of election. For that reason, it's going to dilute the voting strength of African Americans in this city. It's going to dilute the voting strength of Hispanic Americans. So that's our second largest. In the 6th district, it's 40-something African American, 10 or 11% Hispanic. That's going to dilute both of those individually as well. So that goes from 44% down to about 14%, 15%. So again, this gives us the greatest opportunity. May the best man or woman win. But with this piece of legislation, this charter amendment, as a solution is not the way. And the last thing I'll say about it is, and I fight for this in Nashville, a lot of folks in the super majority try to make sure that they're putting their fingers and fists on our cities. But what I've always said, let's give the power to the people. We need to have legislation done at the closest places that people are. And that's what having an all district election would do. That way you got 30,000 people that you're beholden to. Now you care about what's going on in these other areas like I do, but having our elected officials represent us and know that I can get you unelected if you're not representing my district's interests.
All right. Reverend Brown, and you touched on this, or didn't really touch on it, but you led me into this about the NAACP because it has come up in social media and some other places wanting to know, and I know this is your personal opinion and you're not speaking for the NAACP, but the NAACP does have a general aversion to at-large voting for the very fact that in many places it has diluted the African American vote. So with that, why do you support passage of Amendment 2 in light of the NAACP's longstanding stance?
Yes, and thank you so much for that question, because this gives us an opportunity to clear a lot of things up. And so I will first say that it has always been the position of the Knoxville branch that the citizens of Knoxville would have an opportunity to have dialogue like we're having today. And eventually the citizens of Knoxville will be able to make the decision of how they want to conduct their local elections via referendum versus something being imposed on us by the General Assembly. I would also like to say, when we talk about the litigation that the NAACP has been engaged in, because the Voting Rights Act 1965 is one of our greatest victories since our inception. I will add, we have to be very careful to prioritize sharing the nuanced information. And so if you look at the document that, has been circulating on social media, it speaks to when disenfranchisement and discrimination occurs. The NAACP is a very strategic and very targeted organization. And we don't really have a lot of bandwidth to just go chase a lot of rabbits. And so once we do our research and do our homework and we find that discrimination and marginalization occurs with a particular demographic as it pertains to voting and representation, then we do challenge that. I think it's also important to put in proper context that many of those at-large systems that we challenged were 100% purely at-large systems in as there was no residency requirement. And so many of the cases that the NAACP challenged, there were instances where any person in the city, regardless of where they lived, could run for that, county commission or that city council, and you would have overrepresentation from one particular neighborhood or one particular zip code. And so what we have in this amendment, included with the residency requirement, ensures that there are persons who live in a particular zip code in a particular community and will be able to be represented on that legislature. I would also, if I may, also like to add, when we talk about the voting power and the voting turnout, I think we need to look at literally what we have seen happen with the election of Amelia Parker. She is a at-large city council person and defeated in both of her elections a resident from District 2 who outraised her with funding. And so when we look at the election of Seema Singh and how in her first election she actually lost the primary, but won the general election, our first Indian American on our city council. When we look at my city council person from the 6th district, the one that everyone's talking about, the 6th district, this is the black district, and this is where the black person from on city council must come from the 6th district, which I find to be somewhat insulting as a black man, but we can have that conversation on another day. But even with Councilwoman Gwen McKenzie, in her primary, she had going into the general election, she had a white challenger who really had not even been living in this community as long as she had. But it was the general election that made the difference to secure her representation. And when we talk about the representation, I think we while we talk about the greatest concentration of African Americans being in District 6, I think it's also important to know that the majority of African Americans who live in Knoxville live outside of District 6. So District 6 may have the greatest concentration, but the majority of African American residents in the city live outside of District 6 and still have connections to District 6. And so this amendment would give them the ability to support candidates in their district, persons who they have relationship with, because many of the African Americans, while they may live outside of District 6, they still have many ties to District 6. They go to church over here, their families over here, their mothers, their mother-in-law, cousins, brothers, sisters. They went to school over here. So they do have a vested interest in what goes on here. And so one could say going to district only could disenfranchise the Black residents of Knoxville citywide, because that no longer allows us to vote as a block in our city council elections.
Can I jump in, Scott? I have one question, and we'll start again with you, Reverend Brown, but I'd be interested in hearing from both of you on it, because it's something that I've seen raised by people, is that both of you have run for office, so you both have some notion of what that entails and how heavy a lift it can be. The concern that I've seen expressed is that making everybody run citywide creates obstacles for some candidates, and basically it makes it easier for certain kinds of candidates to get elected, people who are already maybe well-known citywide, who have access to resources and, social or professional networks that are going to help them raise money. It costs a lot more. And also, potentially distracts you from your own district, because you have to spend a lot of time outside the district going and building support. So I guess I'm just curious your thoughts on whatever barriers might be created in terms of the kinds of people who can seek office and win.
Well, I'll go ahead. I think that is a very real concern. And I think that could create some possible barriers for persons who are not connected with, circles that could fund them or donate to them heavily for their race. I did run for a state senate back in 2020. And to be honest, it really wasn't a challenge for me. I didn't win in the primary, but with just going into the primary from announcing, persons supported my campaign, and I do understand that I speak as someone who is pretty much a public figure locally and has connections. But I will also add to that, think about the pathways that going to district only could create. One of the incentives that we have for having an at-large system is that there's really no attempt at gerrymandering and having a culture where the elected officials choose their voters, because everybody has to vote citywide anyway. If we go to district only, it may create some barriers and raise, alleviate some barriers and lower some thresholds for fundraiser and earning votes. But I think it could create pathways for special interest groups to also be able to pour money into district elections. We've seen the attempt at that in the past few election cycles. Tim Hill outraised Amelia Parker. I can't remember, his name escapes me now, but the developer that was challenging Gwen in the at-large election outraised her. But she still came out victorious. I think we need to stop assuming that the voters in Knoxville, while we do have a low voter turnout, that the voters in Knoxville are not smart and informed voters. They are. And Representative McKenzie is right. This was something that was put in place in our city by our city leadership, voted by our city officials back in the 60s to undermine voting rights in 1965. But I think there's also something to be said about ideological shifts amongst groups of people, particularly when there are political interests involved. And we do appreciate that there has been an ideological shift in the city of Knoxville, in the electorate, an electorate that prioritizes diversity, that appreciates diverse representation. And I mean, one could be said, if we're going to make references to centuries ago, one could say a century ago, Representative McKenzie would not have a chance of being a Democratic representative from Tennessee. So I think there's something to be considered about the ideological shifts, and we also need to think about what going to district only, what pathways that could create for persons having influence in the turnout of the election, because the threshold has now been lowered.
And Representative McKenzie, your thoughts on potential barriers there?
Oh, they're huge. On this issue, I couldn't disagree more with my good friend, Reverend Brown. What's going to happen if we go to this? Look at the numbers. Numbers generally don't lie. Trends over 1 or 2 cycles you can look at, but the numbers don't lie. What's going to happen is the money coming in is going to come in from special interest groups. Let's take a statewide look at this. Gloria Johnson's running against Marsha Blackburn for Senate. Jane George is running against Tim Burchett for representative. They don't have to show up to anything. That they don't have to show up to anything because they have the money behind them. That's what you're going to end up. You say that Marsha Blackburn represents the great state of Tennessee, everyone. She doesn't. We know that she doesn't. The same thing is going to creep into our city. That's where we still have power of having citizens having a voice. If we go to all at large, these special interest groups, if it's a developer, if it's someone that wants to bring in a dangerous kind of plant into us, they can pour money into these races, into those 2 districts, and move the needle. They can put their foot on the scale. This is a dangerous, dangerous thing that we're looking at. I can't emphasize that enough. I see how money corrupts votes at the statewide level. There are certain people that hate vouchers, but they're scared of the money's drying up, so they're going to support it because of this money coming in to this statewide scam. And that's what we're going to get in the city. Things work best at the smallest denominator, the lowest common denominator, that 6th district, that 5th district, the 1st district. Those are different districts. They have different type of representation. Some are highly educated. Some are working class. But having those people elect one of their own, that's not what we're going to get. You're going to get somebody that's planted in there, like Gwen's opponent was prior to being elected, and have money poured in and had a chance. But what's going to happen, had a chance citywide. But what's going to happen now, those citywide things, they're going to be successful at it. They're going to be intentional about doing that. So this dark money coming in is going to have an effect on our elections. They're going to put their feet on the scale if we have that large system. Again, don't look at me, look at the data around this country. It happens that way. And I guess I'll end with, no one will want at-large countywide election. We have folks in Farragut that have people in East Knoxville in the 6th district or in the 1st district. No one wants countywide at-large election for those same reasons.
Well, all right. Well, we've got time for one more question. What I'll ask is, both of you have been active in this, in talking to people and all. Wanted to find out from you what you thought about the level of whether people are informed. The voters are, do they know what yes means and what no means when it comes to referendum number or amendment number 2, and what they're when they do find out, what are they telling you? And I'm going to start with Reverend Brown.
Yes, thank you. People are, in many ways, some people I've spoken with are still a little confused. They're still seeking out the information because it's just a lot to digest. But I will say that it is a great thing that you have so many community groups our several of our city council people have been having just town hall meetings where, and I've participated in many of them. I would probably say all of them, where we have just conversations and persons, share their sentiments on why they are not voting for it, and some share their sentiments on why they are. And some people leave still undecided. And I think that this is something where persons are really just going to have to go in and vote their heart's conscious and just make the determination what is more important to them. Is it more important to just have the ability to choose and only vote for someone from your district and only have people from your district voting for that person, thus really only having 4 people on city council accountable to you? Or is it important to have all 9 persons accountable to you, but also share in that selection process with all of the citizens of the city of Knoxville? And that's what we have been trying to communicate. And I will emphasize once again, that is why we even wanted this to be put on the ballot, so we could have conversations like this and have some time between when the bill was passed and leading up to our election in November to let the citizens of the city of Knoxville make an informed decision.
Okay, Representative McKenzie, what about the level of knowledge and that the people you're talking to are bringing to this, and what are you hearing from them when you talk to them?
Well, there absolutely is a level of confusion. I really hate the way that the Charter Amendment 2 was written. It's extremely convoluted. They changed districts to region. All of that had nothing to do. It's not really germane to what this is. I love simple language that says we're going from a district-wide to an all-at-large. If they said that, they probably knew it wouldn't pass. So they put in all this confusing language. So what have I seen from people? A lot of confusion. But after we rehash it, and I try to give this the brass tacks, this is what it would do, this is what it would change, to a person, to a man, to a woman, they've all come back and said, we don't want that. Why would anyone want that? Well, you want to have the people in your neighborhood representing you, and not have people from all over influencing who I want to be my representative. And with that said, there are 3 Democrats east of Nashville, myself, Gloria Johnson, and Yusef Hakeem. And we all have said we represent Middle and East Tennessee. From the plateau over, we are representing. I'm headed to Dandridge Saturday because of that. So I don't just focus on the 15th district. And that doesn't happen. These votes that we have in Nashville, I care about what's going on in Memphis, dearly care about what's going on in Memphis, because it has an influence. The city of Knoxville is a great city, but it's a city of, it's a quilt. But we're going to give up the patches of that quilt and become one monolithic body where everybody's nodding in the same thing. And that is ripe to have undue influences take away from the fabric that is Knoxville. Having at-large elections would do that. So there's been a lot of confusion, and I just encourage people to ask questions. Whether you're for it or against it, ask questions, make an informed decision, listen to this broadcast, and and things like this. So it's slow coming, but I do think people care, and I've got a lot of people calling, asking questions on that.
Well, all right. Well, that's about all the time we have for this. We could go on much longer and wish we could, but there are constraints. So thank you very much, Reverend Brown and Representative McKenzie, for taking the time to join us and talk with us about this. And I'm sure that you all will be busy between now and November 5th, especially you, Representative McKenzie, and since you are on the ballot yourself. But thank you very much for coming, and we will talk to you again very soon.
All right. Well, thanks again to Reverend Brown and Representative McKenzie for joining us. And we are actually going to be running some excerpts from that conversation as a news story on our website this week. And so for anybody who's not a podcast listener, but you still want them to have a chance to hear what those two gentlemen have to say about it, you can look for that and forward it on to whoever you want to share it with.
And we'll say once again that all of our election coverage is outside the paywall at CompassKnox.com. So
that's right. Okay, looking forward to this coming week. Not a tremendous amount on the civic calendar. First of all, of course, early voting continues throughout the week. And once again, you can find all of the dates and times for that at knoxvotes.org. County Commission is meeting on Monday, and these are their third Monday of the month meetings. So what that means is that at 3 p.m. Monday, they will have an informal agenda review session where they will be looking at items on their voting agenda for the next Monday, the 28th, and just kind of they don't go through it item by item. They just kind of let individual commissioners who have questions or comments or anything about specific issues talk about them. Then at 5 o'clock this Monday, the 21st, in the main assembly room of the City County building, Commission will have their monthly zoning meeting, and this is where every month, mostly what they do is they consider individual rezonings that are brought to them by property owners who are wanting to. The most common of these, of course, are people who want to rezone in order to do some kind of development, residential or commercial or whatever, that is not currently allowed by their current zoning. So they're seeking that, and they have a bunch of those on the agenda. But also at the bottom of the agenda are 5 items being brought by County Commissioner Andy Fox. And we talked about this last month because he tried to get these items added to the agenda last month, but he filed it too late and couldn't get sufficient support to get them added. This month he got them filed on time. They are on the agenda. And what he's trying to do is something that nobody who follows local government or politics can remember ever having been done before, which is County Commission itself initiating rezonings of property against the wishes of the people who own the property. The way rezonings typically work, like I just said, is a property owner comes to Planning Commission and then to County Commission, or if it's in the city, to Planning Commission and then to City Council, seeking to rezone their property because of something they want to do with it. However, County Commission itself does have the authority to just unilaterally undertake a rezoning of a particular piece of property. And so what Fox is attempting to do here, and Fox ran on a platform that was quite skeptical of development, particularly of anything that brings more density into the more rural outlying areas of his district, which is in South Knox County. And there were several rezonings that were approved this year by County Commission, but were controversial. These mostly have to do with the Thunder Mountain development in the Dry Hollow community, which we've talked about a lot, which is down kind of between Chapman Highway and Sevierville Pike, down near the county line in South Knox County. And then there's another property on Tipton Station Road. In all of those cases, the owners came and asked County Commission to rezone the property in ways that allowed them to build more than what they would have been allowed to do under their previous zoning. Local residents raised concerns and objections, and County Commission went ahead and approved them with some conditions. You know, there were various compromises and so forth, but County Commission did approve all of those. Now, Fox, while he was running for office, opposed all of those, but of course he wasn't on County Commission yet. He was not yet on commission when they came to commission for a vote. And so he's basically coming in now. He was just sworn in September and saying that, no, I want to go back and redo he wants a do-over, essentially. All of these rezonings that were just granted, he wants to come back in and seek to downzone them back to their previous zonings that they had. Again, this is something County Commission has the at least theoretical power to do, but it's not something that anybody can remember them doing before. And there are some potential legal issues here because while County Commission it certainly has the power to rezone property, it has to do it in accord with its own, stated plans and adopted land use policies, and also you cannot do anything that a court would find to be arbitrary or capricious. And one certain hallmark of arbitrary and capriciousness is often that there's no particular broader public policy reason for it. It's just that I don't like this particular thing. That gets into something called spot zoning, which you are basically not allowed to do. Now, do any of these things that Fox is trying to do actually qualify as spot zoning? Do they qualify as arbitrary and capricious? I mean, those are all things that would maybe have to be fought out in court if this actually proceeds. The East Tennessee Realtors, not surprisingly, have spoken out against this. They, and I'm sure many developers in the county, are also going to have a lot of concerns about it, because they do not want to live in a world where once you get property rezoned, somebody can, and you start proceeding with the project, somebody can then come along 3 months later because an election happened and say, no, you know what, we're gonna zone it back in the other direction. Yeah. So this is definitely going to be a hot topic as far as zoning meeting topics go. And it'll be really interesting to see. We have 5 brand new commissioners who just came on to that 11-member body last month. This is going to be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah. We talked about it's unprecedented. It is unprecedented on this individual basis. Of course, Rico Knoxville, when they redid the city redid their zoning code, everybody got rezoned. Yep. But everybody got rezoned, and they took great pains to try. They weren't successful on every parcel in the city, but they did take pains to try to make sure that the land use that was allowed on pieces of property remained the same, even though the zoning terminology might change and things like that. So,
right,
but,
and where
but that was where you went, where you were going when you talked about a greater, greater public interest there.
Policy
framework. Yeah, that's the definition of that, because that was for the whole city. Everybody was affected by it. So that's not arbitrary and capricious.
And some there were certainly some changes in the advanced Knox process that Knox County just went through.
Yeah,
where some areas were reclassified from rural designation to a more sort of suburban designation that would allow for more quote unquote planned growth. And in both of those cases, there were very few instances where property owners ended up with fewer options for developing their properties. Most of what happened was properties were rezoned to allow for a greater range of uses. Right. What Fox is trying to do here is actually, there's the phrase is it's called down zoning, and it's when you rezone something in a way that reduces the options that a property owner has.
Well, and also with advanced Knox, that was those are plans. It's not zoning. That's, right. Your property. If you live outside the city limits of Knoxville and Farragut, your zoning is still the same. The land use, your potential for rezoning, you've got more options if you do want to rezone, but your zoning itself has stayed the same.
Right.
So
exactly.
But yeah, this is something I certainly have never seen. So.
Yep, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So absolutely. We will be back next week to talk about that and anything else that happens in the interim, including with early voting. And I think that's going to do it for this week. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.